Welcome to the Arabesque Sewing Studio. Now today I'm delighted to introduce you to my next sewing pattern. This is the Crafted Life Companion. Now the Crafted Life Companion is an A5 notebook cover to hold a journal or a notebook. It features a cool closure flap, loads of internal storage, cover design options so that you can customize this, and it's beautifully padded so it feels like a warm hug for your notebook. Now in this pattern I've worked really hard to give you lots of options to customize this for the way you would like to use your notebook. So whether you're a journaler, someone who loves to plan your sewing projects and keep track of your fabric swatches or inspiration, or whether you love keeping a gardening diary, there's many ways you can use this because I've packed this full of options so that you can customize this for your own personal needs. So let's open this up and have a look inside. So inside you'll find internal storage with pockets to hold places for fabric swatches, seed packets, stickers for journaling. There's an inbuilt pen holder to have your favorite pen handy exactly when you need to use it. On the other flap we have a place built in for a notepad to-do list. So if you love to do a big brain dump of everything in your journal, you can pull out and itemize shopping lists and to-do lists so that you can head straight into a productive day and note everything down on this place. And there's also an option for more internal pockets if you think you won't use a notepad. Now this pattern gets its beautiful shape and structure from layers of interfacing and fleece, and I'll be taking you through all the steps you need to know so that you can work with this and get the exact same result that I've got here. This pattern has options for the design shown here with the spine and the front and back cover. You can also sew this out of one single piece of fabric and make a whole cloth cover, or you could try and use orphan quilt blocks that you would love to star. And of course I can't wait to see all the ways you're going to place your favorite fabric on this front flap, because this is begging for a beautiful fabric to star front and center. Now in the pattern we close this flap with ham snaps, but today in the tutorial I'm going to be running you through how to add magnetic snaps if you would like to have that option to hold this shut as well. Now if you love sewing organisational videos that help you grow in your confidence and your sewing skills, I'd love you to give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. So you can find a link for the pattern and all the supplies I'll be using today linked in the description below. So if you would like to sew along with me today, go grab a copy of your pattern and your supplies and we'll get started. So I'm just going to run through the supplies that I'll be using here today. So I've cut all my pieces out with a variety of quilting rulers. So that can be really helpful just for accuracy and speeding up the whole process. And I've also got one of these very small 6.5 inch by 1.5 inch rulers, which are just really great for marking any marks you need to add to the pattern. You're going to need a range of fabric marking pens that you're comfortable using. I've got my seam ripper, which I use all the time. I would never be without it. I've got a couple of different pairs of sharp scissors, and I love these because they have a very fine micro tip that's very pointy. I like using a knitting needle sometimes for turning out my points and making my points nice and pointy. I've got a big bowl of binding clips. If you're going to be using cam snaps, you're going to need a cam setting tool and an awl, and I also like using this as a stiletto for getting in underneath the sewing machine needle when you need to just get a little bit more control on that fabric. I often burn my thread ends when I'm using polyester thread with a lighter, and I do a lot of my basting with basting glue. So this is a fine line glue tip. So I'm going to run through all the pieces that I've got cut out here today, and I'm going to be sewing the default version for this pattern tutorial. So that means that I'm going to be adding this notepad holder onto the left hand side and sewing pocket C and pocket D and the pen holder. So if you're going to be following the different variations, you're going to be replacing the notepad holder here with pocket A
and pocket B and flap B. And you might also want to do a whole cloth cover. This is the default version where we add a spine into the design and we have a front and back cover. And another change I'm going to be doing today is instead of adding cam snaps, I'm going to add some magnetic closures. So I've got some 15mm sets here, and I will still have a video on how to add cam snaps if you would like to do this version. So to get started on this pattern, you're going to need to print out your core templates. So these are the templates which you can't cut just from the cutting table. Now, if you would like a full set of templates, we also provide a file which has every single piece that you can cut out and trace around if you would like. Before you start cutting everything out, you need to make sure when you've printed your first page, and I do recommend you just print the first page of the templates with the scale square on it, and you check that your printer is set to full size and no scaling, and then you're going to check this scale square. So just place your ruler over the scale square, and when this is correct size, you should not see any of those sides of that square underneath that inch mark. That should be completely hidden, and that means that you have all this at the correct scale, and you can go ahead and print the rest of your templates and confidently cut them out knowing that they're going to be the right size. So I'm just going to run through the fabrics that I've chosen for this version today. So these three are from the new Tilda range called Creating Memories, and I'm using this very cute micro stripe for the spine, and I just love adding a horizontal stripe onto my spine because I think it just gives a really good book kind of effect to the project. This is going to be my flap, this is going to be my lining, and this is going to be my front and back cover and all of my pockets. So this is from an art gallery range from a few years ago. I believe it's a Barry J print. So I'll link all this in the description below. You might still be able to find some of this around, or you might have some in your stash. So you are going to need a range of interfacings to complete this project with the woven cotton fabric that I am using. And I do recommend that you follow my instructions for this if you would like to have a really crisp and beautiful looking project at the end. You're going to need 1 yard of medium woven fusible interfacing. So I'm using Pellon SF101 for this. And this just backs all of the woven cotton fabric that I'm using and gives it structure and stops it stretching. You're also going to need 12 inches of heavy one-sided fusible interfacing. So this is Peltex 71F, and this is what's going to give the project the rigidity and firmness that we are wanting for this. And I've also got 18 inches of fusible fleece, and this just gives another layer of plushness and just a really beautiful quilted look. And another little notion that I'll be using is some 3mm elastic, which we use just to hold the notepad down to stop it flapping around when we open the book. So here we have our exterior closure flap. This is our interior closure flap. This is our spine. This is our front and back. This is the pen holder. This is the insert that's going to hold the notepad. This is the left and right inner flaps. This is the flap extension, and these are pockets C and D, and this is the fleece that is fused onto the combined covers when they are sewn together. And right at the end of the project, we insert this heavyweight interfacing into the covers of the book, which is optional, but this does give it a lovely sturdy feel and just gives it a little bit more structure. And when the piece calls for woven interfacing followed by fusible fleece, we're going to be fusing the woven interfacing first, followed by 2 layers of fusible fleece, and that will need to be fused from the right side of the fabric or using a pressing cloth to cover the fleece, because you can melt your fleece if you fuse that directly. And when we're doing the internal cover flap, that will also have the woven interfacing applied first, followed by the heavy interfacing after that, and that will need to be fused from the right side as well. So here we have all the pieces fused, and immediately this starts to look a lot less intimidating. So I have set aside my lining and my cover fleece and my insert, and we're going to be dealing with them in some later steps. So now just take your front and back cover and your spine, and we're going to set aside the other pieces. So take the pieces for your spine and your front and back cover. You're going to lay them right sides up with the front cover on the right, spine in the center, and the back cover on the left. So then we're going to take the front cover and place it onto the spine right sides together. So just place a few clips along this edge. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch down this right hand edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So then you're going to open this out, and we're going to take the back cover and place this right sides together on the left hand edge of the spine. We're going to align this edge and we're going to clip this together. So then we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch down this left hand edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So now we're going to open this out and we're going to give this a press. So the pattern says to press both of these seams towards the spine. So I like to start by pushing that seam from the right side onto the spine, giving it a bit of a finger press with my fingernails, and then grab the iron and give that a good hit of heat just to set that in place. And then take this edge, we're going to push that onto the spine, then flip this over, give that a bit of a finger press, and then hit that with the iron again. So flip the cover over to the wrong side, and we're going to take that piece of fusible fleece that we set aside from earlier, and we're going to center that within the seam allowance, making sure that our spine seams are still pressing in towards that spine. And then we're going to flip that over and give that a press from the right side to set that in place. Now, because this is a large piece, I don't want to be just pushing all the way across here. I'm going to just fuse halfway, and I'm just going to check from this side again that I haven't fused, that it's still sitting where I want it to be. Then I'm going to pinch these corners and flip this back, making sure I haven't moved anything under there, and hit that with the iron again. And then I'm going to push my way back towards the spine, getting everything to sit flat. And this way you don't stretch everything by pushing it across all in one go. There we can see this is all sitting beautifully flat. Now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch down each of the inner edges on the spine at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now the exterior cover of this project is done. So if you are following variant 1 of our Choose Your Adventure, then you can also cut this cover from one whole piece of fabric and quilt it if you would like, and then cut it down, or you can piece this from scrappy pieces of patchwork, or even perhaps use some orphan quilt blocks. So if you would like to just have your own spin on this, you can very much just use whatever you've got on hand and piece this cover from that kind of thing, and it's going to look super charming as well. So now we're going to construct the right inner flap. So you're going to grab both of these pieces and lay them right side up, and you're going to choose one of these to be the side that you're going to see. So the side that you're going to see is going to have the pocket stitched on top of it. So I'm going to select this side here. So just grab your right inner flap template, and you'll see that there's a little pocket marked in dashed lines on here. And I'm going to take my sewing awl here and just poke exactly through the center of that hole to make a mark so that I can center this on this piece. So you're going to lay it on exactly straight and then mark through each of these holes so that you can see that there's a dot to align your pocket to when we are ready to sew that. So then you're going to take the second right inner flap and lay that right sides together. Now we're going to clip down this left hand edge. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch down this left hand edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So then we're going to give this a press and open this edge out. Press that seam again and then fold that wrong sides together, aligning all those raw edges. And just double check that you've got that seam sitting right on the very edge of that inner edge so that everything is nice and straight. And the idea is that you don't want one side peeking out more than the other side. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine. We're going to top stitch down this left inner edge at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. And we're going to baste these remaining edges together at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you are following variant 2 in our adventure, then you're going to be configuring your left flap for pockets A and B and flap B. So you're going to take your left inner flap template and poke through these holes that are marked here and mark the placement for these pockets on your left inner flap. So I'm going to set this right inner flap aside and we're going to construct the insert. So grab your fabric piece for your insert and your interfacing, and we're going to flip this so it's wrong side up. And on this insert we're going to mark 2 inches down from each of the short edges. Mark a line. So now grab your interfacing and center this within these 2 lines so that this top edge is aligned with the top line and the bottom edge is aligned with the bottom line, and the inner edges are centered within the seam allowance. So press that in place. So we're going to fold the fabric along this top edge of the interfacing to the wrong side, getting that nice and straight, and press that in place. And then fold up this bottom edge level with the edge of the interfacing and press this in place as well. Now this is where I like to do some glue basting. So I'm just going to glue baste along these edges just with a tiny bead of glue. Now smooth that all out flat again, and you're going to set that in place with the iron to dry that, and that means that this won't gum up your needle because you're not working with the wet glue here. So we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch from the wrong side at a 1/4 inch away from each of these inner raw edges. So now take both of your left inner flaps and choose one of these to be the exterior that the insert is going to sew onto. So just set this one aside for a tick. Now if you've got directional fabric, you're going to want to make sure that this is facing the direction that you want to see it, and that this is your top edge. So on your top edge, you're going to mark 3/4 of an inch down and rule a line. Is this crooked grid annoying anyone else? Try as I may, I could not get this to sit straight. So we've marked 3/4 of an inch down on here. We're going to mark 3 inches up from the bottom edge. So now take your insert and align the top folded edge with the top line that we've marked here, and the raw edges aligned straight as well. And then pop a few clips down each side. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to baste down each of these edges at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And I do recommend that you baste from top to bottom on each side. So don't flip the project on the other side, because what you'll find is this will tend to skew and you won't end up with a straight edge. Now mine is not going to look terribly straight anyway because my grid is crooked, and yes, this is annoying me greatly, but because this is a woven fabric here, can't really do a lot about that despite all of the pressing and starching that I tried to do to straighten this grid. It is remaining crooked for me. Let's go to the sewing machine. So then you're going to cut a width of elastic, the length of the left inner flap. Now I actually like to cut it just a little smidgen wider, just to make it a little bit easier to handle. So we're going to measure 1.5 inches up from the bottom edge and just place some marks here, and then take this elastic and align that over the top of the marks. And clip that in place. So I haven't stretched this elastic, it's just sitting flush with the fabric. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to baste this elastic to the left inner flap at 1/4 inch seam allowance. So take your second left inner flap and place this right sides together on top of the insert and the elastic, and we're going to clip down this right hand edge here. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch down this right hand edge at 3/8 seam allowance. So now grab your iron and open up your seam. I'm going to press this seam towards the second inner flap, so the one without the insert on it. So press that flat first. That really helps get that seam nice and open so that nothing is still tucked in together. And then we're going to fold this wrong sides together and align these raw edges on the outside edges. Make sure everything's nice and flat, and I'm going to press along this edge, and we're wanting that inner seam here to be exactly on the edge. So we don't want any of the back peeking through to the front and none of the front peeking through to the back. So take your time with pressing here. I do believe pressing really is key, or one of the major keys, to achieving a very neat, crisp project at the end. Okay, so when we have pressed that, you're going to clip around these raw edges. So it's really important to align everything exactly, even if it's fighting you, just push it back into place so that everything is neatly lining up. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch down this right inner edge, and we're going to baste around these remaining 3 edges at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, if you are following variant 2 on our adventure, then you are going to construct your pockets exactly the same way as we construct these here. So pocket A is actually the same as pocket D. So if you're going to be constructing pocket A, you're just going to cut out 2 more of pocket D as well. So we have our interfacing fused on the wrong side of these pieces, and I'm going to be sewing these together, but this is one of the most important parts of this pattern to get right if you want this to look really crisp and accurate and have that stationary effect like this is a piece of paper. So my favorite way to get a really even seam allowance, particularly around this notched edge, which I understand is a really tricky part to sew on, but my favorite way is to take the interfacing template and lay this back over the top of this and trace around this again. And when you do that, that is going to be the stitching line that you are going to follow exactly. So if your interfacing has warped a little bit, or you haven't quite cut it out exactly right, which is very easy to do, then by tracing the template back onto the fabric again, you're going to have a nice even stitching line to follow around. And what I do is when I come to this notch, I will stop and hand crank my sewing machine so that my needle is going to stop exactly on that inner corner, so that it doesn't go one single stitch further into the middle or stops too soon, so that I can control that this is going to stitch exactly on that line, and I'm going to get a really neat crisp result. So you're going to place these right sides together and clip them together. So I'm going to mark an opening on each of these pockets on the opposite side to the notch. So on pocket C, I'm going to mark 3.5 inches roughly. This doesn't have to be exact. This is just so that you've got a nice gap to turn this through. And on pocket D, I'm going to just mark a 2.5 inch or so opening here. So now I'm going to take these to the sewing machine, and I'm going to be stitching right around the edge here at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to be following this line that I've traced with my interfacing, making sure that I stitch very slowly and carefully around this notched edge. So now we're going to trim the seams on these pockets down to about 1/8 of an inch. So just snip your way all around. Now as we come across this opening that we've left here, I'm actually going to leave that long. So I'm just tapering my cut back in on each side of that opening. I'm also going to snip off these corners, being really careful to get close to that stitching but not to cut through it. And I'm also going to cut out this notch and cut the corners diagonally off on that notch. And then I'm going to snip just some little cuts into that seam, so cutting up to that stitching but not through it. Now that is going to mean that this notch is going to open out very nicely when we turn this right sides out. So let's repeat this for pocket C. So now we're going to turn this right sides out just by carefully pushing all of this inside fabric to the outside and not tugging on that opening too much, or we're going to rip the stitching. So just reach in and poke out everything as best as you can, just with your fingernails to start with. So you're wanting to start defining that curve, that notch, and the corners, and the curves on the bottom. So then I like to very carefully, with the point of my scissors, and of course you can use a knitting needle or a point turner if you would like, I'm just going to wiggle very gently on the points of this pocket until I can see that that corner is beautifully defined. I'm going to move along to the corner of the notch and just poke carefully. I'm not poking hard so that I break my stitching, or poke all the way through and make a hole. And then I'm scraping that closed blade of my scissors just along that seam, just to get that all pushed right out where I need it to be. Now you want to define these little curved bottom edges. So you might have stitched exactly on the line and you still might find that that's not looking good, but you can pull on this and push on this with the blade of your scissors and get that to sit a lot nicer and a lot flatter and have a much more defined curve on it. So you can actually do quite a bit shaping the seams and the shape of this piece just by how well you push everything out as you're working on this part. Now this part, you can either tuck this in before you pull it right side out, or you can just play around with it now. So I'm going to just press this again. So I'm just going to start by pressing everything flat, not directly pressing that opening just yet. Then I'm going to just work at this edge here and tuck everything in, just tug on those outside seams. And what you're looking for is a nice straight edge along here. So don't bother about getting them actually aligned just right now. I'm just going to work on one edge first. Just give that a very light press. That warms everything up. And you can just work on tucking in the other side. And you're going to pick one side to be your right side here. So typically you will have one edge, one side that you think looks just a little bit nicer than the other. And you might actually have a print that you're wanting to feature here, and maybe you've got something not so liked on the back. So just tuck everything in, and I find that you can just play around with this. Until you're happy with how that's sitting. I think that's looking pretty good. So I'm going to glue base this edge shut just with a tiny bead of glue. Just push that together, set that with the iron. So I'm really happy with that. That's looking really straight and smooth and about as even as you can get a piece of fabric when you're working with something that's warpy and stretchy. I think this is pretty good. So we're going to repeat this process for pocket C. So we're going to take both of these pockets to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along this notched edge at a 1/16 of an inch seam allowance. So set pocket D aside and we're going to take the right inner flap and make sure you've got it facing right side up with the marks for the pocket on the right side, and the top stitched edge is going to be on the left hand edge. So then take this pocket C and align this with the notched edge facing this top stitched edge, and these outer corners of pocket C, going to align that to the marks that we've made here. Now I'm going to glue baste my pocket in place, so without going into the seam allowance much at all, I'm just going to put a little bit of glue around that edge. A little bit of glue along this bottom edge, and a little bit of glue along this remaining short edge. Set that in place with your iron. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch this pocket to the right inner flap, sewing around these short edges, down the long edge and around the bottom short edge at a 1/16 of an inch seam allowance. So now we're ready to construct the pen holder. So you're going to take both of these pieces and lay them wrong sides up, and you really only need to do this on one piece because this is going to be the side you're going to sew on. So take the pen holder template, and where these notches are, I like to just cut a little V into that so that I can mark with my pen. So just set that back on the fabric and get your marking pen, and you're going to mark in each of these notches, and that is going to be where the stitching line is. Now once again, you can take your interfacing template if you like and lay that back over this piece and trace around that edge if you feel like your interfacing has moved a little bit or perhaps isn't accurately cut. So that is a little tip just to help you get the shape right. So then we're going to place these right sides together and just put a little clip here and just clip on this top short edge, and we're going to sew from that notched edge into the top point of that interfacing there. Follow that curve around on that interfacing, stopping on that second point, and then straight across to that notched edge on the other side. So now give this a press on that seam, and we're going to trim off this notched edge at 1/8 of an inch away and cut along this curve at 1/8 of an inch, and then notch into this curve just like we did with the pockets, so that we can ease this curve out and there is space for it to nicely open out when we turn this right side out. Turn this right side out and place the wrong sides together, and we're going to push this curve up and define these points. So you can get your scissors back and just gently push that point outwards and flip it around and repeat for the second one. So when you're happy with how that's looking, just give it a press. So just grab a few clips and clip these edges together. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch along this notched edge at a 1/16 of an inch seam allowance, and then we're going to baste around the remaining 3 edges at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now take your pen holder and your flap extension and lay your flap extension right side up, Make sure you've transferred both of these marks from the template. And we're going to take the right hand top corner edge and align that with the right hand mark here on the flap extension, and match up these raw edges going down the bottom here so that this lines up with the bottom corner as well. So just clip your way along here. Then we're going to align the left hand edge of the pen holder and push this in. So this is wider than the flap extension to allow for the bulk of a pen. So we're going to have to push this and get these layers to align together, and it's not going to want to because this is wider. So just clip as many clips as you need to get these layers, these raw edges, to align nice and straight. So we want both of these bottom corners aligning and both of these top edges aligning with these marks here. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to baste along the raw edges on the pen holder at 1/4 inch seam allowance. So set the pen holder and the flap extension aside. So grab your interior closure flap and your interior closure flap template. I'm going to lay that on top of the right side, and we're going to transfer the markings on here for pocket D and also the markings for the male snap placement. If you're going to be using cam snaps for your closures, then you're going to poke a hole through each of these marks that we've made here with your awl. Then you're going to take the cap of the cam snap and push that through from the wrong side, and the male cam snap is going to sit on top, and then you're going to clamp that with the tool. But today I'm going to be using some magnetic closure snaps today. So you're going to need 4 backs. You're going to need both of your male snaps, so that is the one with the sticking out part, and this side. So set the female sides aside and 2 of the backs aside. You're also going to need your seam ripper or something very similar. Now to mark the placement for this, you're going to take the back piece and place that circle over that mark that we've already made, and then mark inside each of these little slots with your pen, and repeat that for the second one. So center that hole over that line and then mark where each of these slots are going to go. So these slots are going to go into those marks that we've just made there. Now very carefully grab your seam ripper and push that point through all of the layers, and just push very gently through each of these holes here. Now it can be helpful just to flip it around sometimes and come back again from the other side, just to make sure that you're not going to go too far. It can be quite easy to slip here. So just check that you've made a big enough hole for these prongs to go through. So you're going to push that through from the right side. That's fitting really well. So flip that over, slide this backing piece on top. Then you're going to grab your scissors or another strong tool and flatten these edges out. And you want to make sure these are really flat so that they're not going to create any unnecessary bulk inside. So go ahead and repeat this for the second snap. I've just grabbed an old butter knife here, and this can actually be a little bit easier to set. Make these go nice and flat. So then grab pocket D and make sure you've got it the right way up that you would like. I think I'll choose this side. So you're going to align this to those marks that we've made here, and grab your glue, and we're going to glue our way around this edge just with a really fine bead of glue. Just align that back again with the notches and just set this in place with the iron. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch around the outside edge of this pocket at a 1/16 of an inch seam allowance. So now lay your interior closure flap right side up with the straight edge on the left, and take your pen holder and your flap extension and lay that right side up, and we're going to be joining these down this straight seam here. So flip this over right sides together, and we're going to be clipping these together and pushing the bulk of that pen holder that is sticking out, pushing that in towards the center so that's not getting caught in that seam allowance. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to be stitching along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and you might find it easier to actually stitch from the flap side so that the ridge of that firm interfacing is, you can stitch right up basically in the ditch of that, and make sure that you're not catching that in your seam, but you are getting as close as you possibly can to it. So I have pressed this towards the flap, and now we're going to be top stitching along this inner edge on the flap down the side of the flap extension and the pen holder, making sure you're catching this edge in that seam. Now, if you have applied cam snaps here, it's really important not to directly press your cam snaps with the iron because you will melt them. So take extra precautions here. Do whatever you need to do to remind yourself not to press them if you're using cam snaps. So you might want to take like a piece of masking tape or something like that just to stick on top of it. So now take your interior closure flap with your flap extension and your pen holder added, and you're going to lay your exterior flap on top. So make sure that you've got your interfacing fused first, followed by 2 layers of fleece. So we're going to lay these right sides together with the curved edges matching, and we're going to clip our way around, matching all of this together. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch around these curved edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now you also might find it easier once again to stitch from the interior closure flap side where the firm interfacing is. So you can follow exactly along this inner edge and make sure that you're not stitching on top of it, but you're stitching exactly in the ditch on this edge. So now we've got these flaps sewn together, we're going to trim this edge seam down by about half, just to reduce any bulk that we're going to have in here with the extra fleece and interfacing. So now let's turn this right side out. So you're going to have to scrunch everything up and crush that firm interfacing. So don't worry if it all looks a little bit creased, because we're going to be able to press it all back beautifully flat again. So just reach right in, and you want to really push on that seam to bring all those edges right up to the outer edge so that nothing's overlapping and still sticking down in there. And you can see that you've got the internal edge and the exterior edge are right on that very edge. And also going to tug on these outside seams on the pen extension as well. So give everything a really good press again around this exterior curved edge. And you can press it from both sides, being really careful if you've got cam snaps not to press them directly. Now we want to clip these straight edges together on these raw edges. And what we're wanting to do is make sure we're pushing the bulk of that pen holder in towards the center, so we're not catching any of that extra bulk while we stitch. So put as many clips on as you need. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch around this outer curved edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and baste down these inner raw edges at 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now this flap is beautifully top stitched and looking really smart and crisp. So we can just set this aside for a minute, and we're going to prepare the lining. So lay your lining wrong side up, and we're going to press under a double hem on each of these short edges. Just to enclose this all really nicely. Now repeat this for the second edge. So we're going to take this to the sewing machine, going to top stitch along this inner folded edge at about 1/16 of an inch seam allowance, so pretty close to each of these inner folded edges. Now, if you haven't already gone ahead and marked your centers, you're going to want to do that. So you can do that just by folding this in half and creasing it top and bottom and placing a mark, or even just doing a little clip. Now grab your front cover, and you're going to lay it right side up with the front on the right hand side, the spine in the middle, and the back on the left hand side. And if you're using a whole cloth cover, the same thing applies. So make sure if you've got directional fabric that you've got it facing the way that you would like to be seeing it, and that your front cover is going to be on the right hand side. So lay this right side up. We're going to take the left inner flap, and we're going to make sure that this is also right side up, and the insert, if you're using it, is at the top and the elastic is at the bottom. And if you're using the pocket insert, going to have pocket A facing the right side up at the top and pocket B at the bottom. I'm going to turn this so it's wrong sides up, right sides together, and put it over on the front cover on the right hand side. Align these raw edges and the corners and clip them together. Now grab your right inner flap, and we're going to place this on the back cover on the left side. So make sure that the pocket is facing the way you would like, and these raw edges are facing outwards on the left side. So align this to these corners and these exterior edges and clip them together. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch around this left inner flap along the 3 raw edges here. And we're going to stitch on the right inner flap, but we're only going to stitch along the top and the bottom short edges just at the moment. So you'll notice that the left and right inner flaps are not central on the cover. So I know this looks wrong, but this is the way that I've designed it. And this is because this is going to accommodate that notepad, and it also helps if this was as wide as this, then we wouldn't be able to slide the notebook in at the end. So now you're going to grab your exterior and interior cover flap, and we're going to place this with the interior flap right side up and the straight edge on the left. And we're going to open up this right inner flap and the back cover section, and we're going to slide this in between these layers and pull this in until we have that straight raw edge aligning down this left edge. So then we're going to clip all this together. We're going to be pushing the bulk of that pen holder into the center away from that seam allowance, and matching up all these layers and just putting as many clips on as you would like to hold everything together. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch down this right inner flap edge on the left side, and we're going to be stitching through all of these layers. So just take it slowly. You are going to be going along the edge of that heavy interfacing. So you just want to make sure as best as you can, even though you can't see it, that you're catching, sewing right along that very edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and just take it slowly because this is quite thick. So now we're on the home stretch. So we're going to lay this back the way we had it, with the left inner flap on the right inner flap on the left, and this closure flap protruding on the left hand side. And we're going to take the lining section and we're going to lay this over the whole lot, and we're going to match up these center marks and clip these together along this straight edge. Now if you've got everything properly aligning, you'll see that this does sit central on the cover here. So align that center mark. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch across the top and bottom edge of the lining at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now you might find it easier to actually stitch from the other side, and what you're wanting to do is catch that row of stitching that you've already sewn from the left and right inner flaps. So try and stitch right on top of that line of stitching, and that's going to get everything sitting nice and flat. So now we need to trim down all the seams and clip the corners. So I'm going to be cutting these down by roughly half. I'm going to leave it long just across the elastic here. And this is quite important, this trimming seam step, because your notebook is probably not going to fit super well if you leave this long inside. So take the time to do this. Just clip those corners close to that row of stitching, but not going through it. So we're up to the really fun part now, where we can turn this project right side out. So we're going to start by reaching into the lining and just pulling that whole layer through. Then we can turn the inner flaps right side out. So just roughly poke those corners out to start with, just with your finger. So pushing everything out as best you can, just to start with. Make sure that elastic is sitting on top. And we're going to turn the right inner flap and pull that flap out, pushing those corners out at the same time. So now you're going to grab your point turner and just very carefully poke that into these corners and just push them out just a little bit more, just to crisp them up a little bit. And the same with the corners on the flap. So now we're going to roll these seams between our fingers and press along the edge. Just to get everything nice and straight and smooth. Now flip it over and you can press it again from the exterior side. Just pull out any stray raw edges that might be peskily hanging around. So now I'm going to top stitch around the entire outer edge of this project. So I'm going to do this from the inside, and I'm going to be making sure that as I go around that the edge is staying exactly on the very edge, so that I don't have one side poking around more than the other. And also when I come to this inner edge where the flap extends from, I'm going to be tugging on both of these, pulling them in opposite directions so that I can really open this seam out and get this nice and crisp along this edge. And I know we'll be stitching blind along this side, but if you do that, you're much more likely to get a nice straight finish on the other side. So we're on the home stretch. So now we just need to set the remaining snaps, and we're going to start preparing for that by test fitting our notebook and our pad and our pen, just to make sure that we have the amount of bulk worked out. So this actually works better if we slide it into the left hand side first. So slide that in, and you're going to open your book up as far as it will go, bend it back and tuck that into the right hand side. Then you can slide your pen into the pen holder and grab your notepad, and the cardboard insert is going to go into the fabric insert, and then the pages are going to sit on top, and that elastic that we sewed at the bottom is going to hold those pages down. That is looking really, really cute. So what you want to do then is shut your book and fold the closure flap around and just play with it for a little bit, just to make sure that everything is sitting the way that you would like. You want to get everything straight. So you make sure that this is closing evenly across here and it's not skewed. And then I'm going to push on these snaps really firmly to make an indent in that front cover. So just grab your pen and push really hard until you can see that you've got a little indent there, and then place a mark where that is indenting. So repeat that for your second one. So make a decent size mark that you can see clearly. Now this is where our female snaps or our cam snaps are going to go. So now you can go ahead and take everything out again. So grab the little inner piece, center that hole over that dot and trace inside of the little side bits in this washer, and then place it again over the second dot that you've got there, so you can see that hole in the center, and then mark those pieces on that washer. Now if you're using cam snaps, you can just go right ahead and open up these layers. You're going to have to pull everything apart and poke your hole directly down through that center hole and put the cap in and the female part on and set that with the clamp. Now if you're using magnetic snaps like I am, I'm going to be placing my firm interfacing into the cover first. So you're going to want to lay this way up and just check that this firm interfacing is going to fit inside the cover. So I can see I'm going to need to trim down about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to eyeball that and snip that off, and that's going to fit very nicely. So reach in on the left hand side and you're going to fold all this in half and push it inside into the right hand side of the cover and open it out, and make sure that the fusible side is facing the fusible fleece. So it's facing the cover and not the lining. So we don't want to fuse this to the lining. So push that in as far as you can get it to go. And then repeat that with the remaining side. So fold that in half, open up the right hand side, slide that in, and then open that up inside the left hand side of the cover. Pushing it as far back in as you can until you can feel that everything is flat inside of there. So then you're going to reach in with your seam ripper and start poking a hole into the front. I'm going to hold this inner flap out of the way. Make sure that you're holding your lining out of the way, so you can feel that it's going right through, and you can rip a little hole. And then repeat that for the second side. So we're wanting to make sure the fabric is flat. We're not warping the fabric as we do this. And you might want to push it back in again from the opposite side and rip back upwards. So poke it directly down. So grab your first female snap and push that in. Through those layers, and then open everything up till you can see those prongs, and we're going to add that washer in over the top. Grab our butter knife and flatten everything down. So that's the first snap set. So now we're going to go back to the second one. So make sure that your fabric is nice and flat when you pierce through this, so that you're not going to pucker your fabric or get it skewy. Push in the second female snap. On top. and flatten that out. So I'm going to give this a press. Okay, so now we can finally fill our cover with our journal. So push that into the left-hand side, bend it back and slide it into the right-hand side. You can slide your pen into the pen holder. If you are using the insert, you can slide this back down into that insert. And close your book. Now sometimes you are going to need to terrain your snaps to end up where you want them to be. You might want to set this upside down overnight with a bit of a heavy weight on it just to help everything set in place. But that is looking really beautiful. I am really excited with how this is looking, and I've loved making this with you. Thank you so much for sewing along with me. I'd love to see if you make a crafted life companion, so let me know what you think of this in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.